Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Jim Powell, Editorial Director at TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about finding the right data provider for your business. Our sponsor is Dun Bradstreet. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Evan Levy with Integral Data LLC. After Evan speaks, we have a presentation from Stephen Casey with Forrester and Elizabeth Barrette at Dun Bradstreet. But before I turn over the time to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of their presentations, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during those presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window, and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we are recording today's event, and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you choose, or share it with a colleague. Okay, again, today we're going to be talking about finding the right data provider for your business. Our first speaker is Evan Levy, a partner at Integral Data, where he focuses his activities on enterprise data strategy, data management, and analytics. He has led numerous customer data and marketing analytics projects over his 30-year career. Evan has been published in a wide variety of industry periodicals and is a best practices judge in areas of data governance, data management, and analytics. Evan also is the co-author of the first book on master data management, Customer Data Integration, Reaching a Single Version of the Truth. Hello, Evan. I'll turn things over to you now.
Terrific. Well, it's just great to be here today, and I'm really honored with the opportunity to talk to everybody along with the folks from Dun Bradstreet and Forrester to discuss the challenges facing sales and marketing of data professionals today. We're going to talk about the key functions of managing and maintaining the customer data, basically the lifeblood of a marketing and operational aspect of a company. And also we're going to go over some real-world customer successes where it makes a difference on having up-to-date, robust content about our customers. So let's go ahead and jump into it. The thing that I thought would be appropriate to frame our discussion is just reminding everybody about the sheer dynamics and volatility of companies and individuals, because we all move around, and maintaining and supporting contact information and the details about us, it's a challenge. I mean, if you notice on the left, the average worker moves 11.7 times in their life. Not surprisingly, they also change jobs on average 12 times. And if you consider the amount of interactions, 121 emails a day, and nearly a third of us change our cell numbers yearly. Now, that's the online or the electronic version. Now, also take a look at some of the postal implications, where addresses both business and consumer, nearly 36 million change a year. And it's been pretty consistent over the last several years, and about 5% of that mail isn't addressed, so about 1 in every 20 pieces of postal mail actually doesn't make it to its destination, and of that, it's a third of it's forwarded or returned. The thing that I think is fascinating is not to a huge surprise is the number of businesses that open every month, nearly 500,000. So one of the inevitable challenges is not just what are the locations of your current customers in this B2B marketplace, but what about the new customers, or if someone has moved? And you can see the statistics, 8% close. About 50% of companies don't last 5 years. And what a lot of folks don't realize is nearly 99% of the companies that are in existence are actually small businesses, and that's organizations of less than 500. And what's also, I think, interesting is the impact of COVID. I mean, that is the moose on the table. And if you take a look at the numbers, you'll notice that last April, this is April of 2020, 140,000 businesses temporarily closed. So being able to reach them was not feasible. 65,000 as of this past August were temporarily closed. So some companies have opened up. Unfortunately, nearly 100,000 have permanently closed. So there's a lot of volatility. And if you consider companies moving, the remote workspace, and so many other things, companies are dependent upon multiple channels of interacting with their customers, their prospects. So it's not just phone calls and mail anymore, obviously. It's email, social media, websites, and virtual events. So there's a lot of detail necessary to maintain and ensure that we can stay in contact with the folks that we're trying to support from a business perspective. The world of the data provider is really evolved dramatically in the last, if you want to say, 15 or 20 years. Now, most people that aren't necessarily familiar with this industry just assume it's all about direct mail and phone calls, and that's where a lot of it started. And it was really because the world of computer processing was just too terribly expensive. And so companies relied upon these organizations to come up with the names and the details and the filtering and so forth to be able to generate customer prospects and lists. And it was really about outbound mail and phone calls. And what's happened over time, obviously, is the whole cost of technology and organizations' technological skills have evolved dramatically. So what evolved was, because processing became a commodity, there was also an awareness that the actual information about individuals and businesses had become invaluable. Understanding the firmographic details, understanding sizes and locations and office locations of companies, and what the company relationships are with subsidiaries and organizing lines of business and stuff like that. What also evolved around that same time is the whole online email world of interaction. So we saw the data provider world evolve far from just provide data, but also focus on customer detail and data enrichment, providing additional details or descriptive elements about those customers so you can do much more intelligent identification. Because ultimately, no one wants to see a bunch of trash show up in their email queue, and when you're interacting with a company, you want to make sure that the company understands who that client is, being able to tie those pieces together. And many of these providers have stepped up and done much more than just offering filtering details. In fact, many of them can consume client information, merge and attach them to the details of the customer. And what's the place that many of these companies have evolved to today is really providing data management analytics in addition to all those other functions and features, because many companies have the chops and the resources to manage their client list, and they have lots of applications. But when it comes to things like AI, machine learning, being able to come up with intelligent clusters of details and trends and so forth, that's where many of these companies can now also step in and help. And I'd say the other thing to also keep in mind is when I have a tremendous explosion of channel connectivity, whether it be social media, online messaging, and so forth, it's a fairly broad and detailed set of information. So as you can see, this data provider world has evolved from being a list generation type function to actually offering up a fairly significant level of analytical capability, as well as all the different connections and connectivity to support that communication. If you take a look at the types of functions that this industry provides, over on the left, what I've tried to illustrate is just a very straightforward company that inevitably has Salesforce automation, because salespeople want to keep track of who their clients are, account-based marketing, so that when I'm actually interacting with a business, it's not just one person. I actually have an idea of who is the audience, all the different interactions and activities that are occurring between my company and that client, and all the locations and the individuals and the communications. Multi-channel marketing, obviously, is just managing the whole premise of, if I want to send or communicate a particular activity, what are the appropriate channels based upon the individuals and their preferences and tastes. And then obviously the customer data platform, the whole idea of being able to support analyzing all this data. And many companies have all these different types, and as you've noticed, I've identified many of the types of software and products that companies have to support this type of capability. So being able to support this isn't just about delivering data content and service. It's also being able to interact with all these different products in a manner that the data can actually be moved in a seamless and consistent manner. And over on the right side, just try and offer a description of the types of data management and reference and other types of data details that the data providing industry can provide. So there's the standard data management function. You may have heard the concepts of reference data or master data management. The whole idea of, if I've got the individuals from Acme Hardware and I've got the simple ideas of Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, am I making sure that I actually identify that individual from purchase lists and or contact details and or prospect lists and all the various different systems? So what the data providing world can actually do is receive information from your 4 different systems on the left and actually tie them all together to help you make sure that you've actually got the integrated connections and the IDs. And that's the whole premise of the data management box. And also deal with the groupings and hierarchies so you understand that an individual working for a company, in fact, may work at multiple locations. The idea of data quality and correction is making sure that, in fact, you've got the most current address details and the various locations of a particular company. Because while you may have a mailing address, you also have to be cognizant that companies rarely put their office location as their mailing address, and companies have multiple office locations. And if you're a salesperson, you want to meet with somebody face-to-face when we get out of this wonderful COVID endeavor, but you want to know what the premise location is, not just the mailing location. So the whole idea of data quality and correction and tracking location details is not just a mail location. It's the physical locations and the relationship of companies and subsidiaries and lines of business. And all of this evolves into the whole data enrichment world, where the data providing industry can actually offer up not just enhanced descriptive details of the clients and the individuals in those organizations, but also support some of the analytic functionality to make sure that if you want to be able to target and identify and segment your prospects or even your customers, you actually have the details available to do that, and it's relatively accurate. So the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about the world of the data provider industry is it's well beyond just data provider. They literally deliver data content and data services. And I'd say the thing to think about when you're going down the path of looking at and trying to understand what a data provider can offer, it's really these 4 different buckets of capabilities. The data enrichment that we've talked about, things like firmographics, trends, locations, and so forth. The actual data services of actually processing and supporting the data activities that are necessary. Platform services, many of them actually can even provide you analytic platforms to actually conduct a lot of the analysis and other types of work that you want. And then finally, just the raw core marketing analytics of supporting the marketeer and people that are dealing with campaigns and things like that. So there's really 4 areas of capabilities that they're delivering. So let me sum up my remarks and say, the thing to keep in mind when you're focused in the data provider world is make sure you have an idea of the needs and requirements that you have. Not every individual within your company is going to need the entire breadth of functionality. So it shouldn't be a feeds and speeds and the length of a list. It's really about what does your organization need, and also understanding what are the different audiences within your organization and what's their experience, because it's rare that someone wants to bite off everything. You may actually be very, very focused on email campaigns and or direct messaging. Well, when you're ready to move into things like social media and other stuff, you actually need to understand those skills, because there's a very broad realm of functionality that's necessary. The other thing that I tell you is the data and data services, this is not a commodity. The companies are very, very different. While the data content is at one level of maturity, you also have to realize that the data management functionality as well as the marketing analytic functionality may be different. And it's really about understanding what is it that you need. And the other thing that I tell you is this is a highly competitive and an evolving marketplace. So it's important to stay in touch and be aware of what you need. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jim and pass the baton.
Thank you, Evan. Just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have a question, you can enter it at any time in the Ask a Question window. We'll be answering audience questions in the final portion of our program. Our next speaker is Stephen Casey, a VP and Research Director at Forrester. His research is focused on the evolution of B2B buyer behavior and preferences and how B2B marketers need to adapt their strategies, tactics, and technologies to create the experiences that modern buyers demand. Steve also covers the markets for data providers, customer data platforms, and ABM platforms. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Jim. Thanks for that introduction. So what I'd like to do is kind of pick up where Evan left off, provided a great overview, I think a great historical overview of the B2B marketing data landscape, and give you Forrester's perspective on how that's evolved, and I'll share some of my specific learnings from some of the recent research we've done. And I want to cover these 4 topics. First, start to give you sort of a grounding in where my commentary and insights will come from. Give you a sense of how some of your peers are thinking about data providers, what's going on in the marketplace. Is the market growing? Is it shrinking? What is driving increased use of data? And then I will share some very specific lessons from a recent evaluation I did of more than a dozen of the leading B2B marketing data providers. And then I'll finish with essentially a few of the key considerations we'd recommend you consider when you're choosing a core data provider. That's an important point we'll cover in a moment. Essentially, I'll give you some insights into the kind of conversations I have with our user clients just about every day. So I've been at Forrester for more than 5 years now, and from the beginning, I've been covering the data providers. I've actually worked in this market for some time on the technology side before joining Forrester. I've actually been a TDWI client. And what I've been focused on during my time at Forrester is it's zoom out and zoom in is kind of how I think about it. I started, one of the first reports I ever wrote was really a comprehensive look at the entire vendor landscape of data providers back in 2017. That's kind of the macro level. And then we drilled in and I did my first evaluation of the leading data providers. Then back out to the vendor landscape level in 2021 as the market continued to evolve. This is certainly a very dynamic market, mature but dynamic. And then again, doing another evaluation which was published just less than, I think, about 6 weeks ago. So very fresh insights here in what we've learned along the way. As I think Jim mentioned in my introduction, I cover a number of technology markets, ABM platforms, customer data platforms, certainly the data providers. I'm also writing about buyer behavior, how buyers are changing, what their expectations are what their expectations are in terms of the experiences they have with their vendor partners. And all of those things together, frankly, I feel like I'm in a great sort of catbird seat here because just about all of those elements are contributing to greater demand for data. Certainly, as ABM hit the landscape about 5 years with new analytics technologies, new predictive capabilities to allow B2B marketers, B2B organizations to do account-based marketing at a much larger scale. Certainly, we've been selling to accounts forever. That's what B2B is all about. We sell to companies. But there was a change in the technology landscape that allowed us to do that, create those personalized experiences, do a much more granular level of targeting and personalization. But to do that, one, have better insights, but do that on a larger scale. And what that requires is better data, better analytics to process that data, to create the kind of insights that are required to decide who should I target, when should I target them, and essentially what should I say to start the conversation. I mentioned buyer expectations. Buyers today really have a different set of expectations in terms of that relationship with their vendor suppliers. And it's one where they essentially expect to be treated as a partner. And they expect you to know who they are, where they've been, and what their business goals are. And frankly, to use that knowledge, it should be persistent in all of those personalized, intuitive experiences they have throughout the buying life cycle, frankly, throughout the entire customer life cycle. Every customer wants to be heard, known, and understood, and the only way you can do that is if you're gathering the right data, generating the right insights, and then expressing that to them through all of those experiences on an omni-channel basis. The pandemic and social distancing it created certainly has added fuel to the fire. As Evan mentioned, right, we've essentially cut off the human channel for engagement. So all of the entire buying cycle has moved to digital channels. The only way you can create those personalized experiences is by gathering more breadcrumbs, gathering more data, generating better insights. You don't have that human in a face-to-face situation to interpret the buyer signals. You need to rely on digital buying signals. And then as we look into the future, I really think it is this continued advancement in terms of analytics, in terms of predictive capabilities, machine learning, being able to interpret the data and the information that's provided to us and that we gather. That's really what will be sort of the next step function, I think, in terms of driving increased demand for data. Ultimately, we will get to a place where AI shows up in more and more of the MarTech and sales tech stack to start to enable true real-time journey orchestration, decisioning. What should be the next step in the buyer journey? Leveraging that unified view of a particular contact buying team or account to have that persistent view and then make these kinds of very sophisticated recommendations. That's really where this is all headed, and I can see just no possibility that we will need less data in the future. We will certainly need more, and we'll need better data. So I want to share with you some insights from a recent survey. Just back from being fielded. This is our global marketing survey. In this particular case, sharing with you the results from 1,200 B2B decision makers, essentially asking B2B marketers, what are your challenges? We asked a wide range of questions, but what I wanted to focus on here was what do you think your greatest challenges will be for your organization as they relate to achieving your marketing goals? We've been running this survey for some time, and I can tell you that data is always at the top of the list. What's a little bit different this time, however, and I think we're seeing the influence of the pandemic, is that changing economic conditions really rose to the absolute top of the list. But the fact that people are saying that their ability to meet their goals is really throttled, or that one of the major challenges they face is not only the quality of the customer data that they have and can gather and manage, but how accessible it is. How quickly do I turn that, how easily can I turn that raw data into meaningful insights to power those kinds of personalized and contextual experiences. I highlighted another data-related element in green because I actually take this as a pretty positive sign. As I said, we've been running this survey for a long time. I've been following these results, and I'm seeing a significant improvement here in marketers telling us that their ability to take action on their customer data is actually less of a challenge than simply gaining access to it, turning that data into insights, and then dealing with the fundamental data quality challenges. Thought I'd also share with you some insights to give you a sense of are people investing or not in data? And the data pretty clearly, what the surveys have shown pretty clearly is that nearly half of all respondents told us in 2021 they would be increasing their spend on data. And what I also wanted to share was give you kind of peel back the onion a little bit and give you a sense of the magnitude of that increase in investment. And of that 47% of respondents who said they'll be increasing their spend on data, you can see roughly a third said they'll be increasing somewhere between 1% and 9%, but it's a pretty significant number. 15% said they'll be increasing 10% or more. So significant momentum here toward increasing investment in data for all the reasons we've talked about. I also wanted to share with you some data from a different survey. So this one was more focused on the data providers themselves. I created and quarterbacked a report called a tech tide. You could think of that as a tech tide on for all B2B marketers. What are the 20 most important technologies that you should have in your stack, or you should consider potentially investing in? And what I'm sharing with you here is we ask respondents to provide their feedback on each of those 20 technologies, and these are the results. This is what we gathered about their feedback on data providers themselves. And we ask for their feedback and insights on a number of dimensions. How would you consider this high maturity or low maturity? Pretty clear, given that our sponsors have been in business for some time. There aren't many tech markets where you have vendors who've been in business past the 100-year mark, but that's certainly the case with our sponsors, and leveraging that history, as you well know. But so no surprise that people would say that this is a market characterized by high maturity. We also asked them to think about, or to give us their feedback on, is it sort of in the range of expensive to cheap? Where does it fall? More than half here saying it sort of falls in between. It's at neither of those two extremes. Really interesting when we ask them to rate, what's the value of the investment? What are you seeing in return? How would you characterize the ROI? Single largest response, nearly 40%, was for medium ROI. But if you add in that 26% of high ROI, those two together give us a pretty strong indication that more than 75% of our respondents said they are seeing significant ROI from their data providers. We asked a couple of other related questions, more topical. Wanted to get a sense of what's the state of the market today? Is it really confusing? Is it so confusing and changing so much? We talked about whether or not, or we made the observation that this is a dynamic market. Sometimes we saw in other markets where it was so confusing, people were sort of sitting on the sidelines, weren't ready to invest. That's not the case here. We also asked whether or not the current pandemic would cause them to take a pause in terms of their investment. And the two of those factors together really only added up to 20%. So people are still proceeding. They're continuing to invest. And as we shared in the previous slides, even investing more in their data providers. This is, I think, another interesting data point, right? It's somewhat anecdotal, but I think it is significant. As I look at this market, certainly we run our own primary research, but we also look for additional signals. How are others thinking about this market? And one, I think, important indicator worth covering is that the investment community, both in terms of private and public markets, there is a significant amount of funding flowing into this. Certainly our sponsors have had a recent event that would be on the significant side, showing that public markets are certainly interested in putting their own money on the line to make investments in data providers as a investment vehicle that could deliver significant return. So it's an important validation, I think, worth covering that, as I said, people who are willing to put their own money on the line, sort of a different motivation than yours as a user. You're much more focused on ROI. This is a different type of ROI, but I think there's a parallel picture here and a consistent story that there's a strong need for data. People are getting a significant return from their providers, and that's a significant factor as we think about the overall market trends. So now I want to segue into a discussion about that most recent wave, that evaluation I did of more than a dozen leading data providers, just recently wrapped up. I think I can also mention that our sponsors, Dun Bradstreet, will be sharing. You'll have opportunity to get a copy of this particular report. And wanted to have a little bit of fun with this. I've come up with this thing I call Casey's Law of Data Providers. It became apparent even back when I started working and did my first evaluation back in 2018. I had a a conversation with one particular organization, large global company. We do customer reference calls as part of this evaluation, and they basically, I was calling on behalf of one of the vendors who provided them, but they also pointed out they work with virtually everyone. It is true in this market today that there really is no single bullet or silver bullet solution, right? Most often, the by far and away, how most B2B companies work with data providers is they tend to have a core data supplier, one comprehensive supplier who can provide the core data types, value-added services on top, and then they will pick and add one or two complementary, maybe 3 or 4. There seems to be, as I said, the larger the company, the more data providers they work with. But certainly there is this notion that I have found in the implementation and how customers or organizations are working with data providers today. They choose a core provider and then 1 or 2 complementary niche providers. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute when we drill into some of the results here from the wave. This was our take. I wanted to share with you how we think about evaluating in this process. What was the criteria we used? Again, in the report, you'll have a live spreadsheet version of this. So, and you can actually go in and change the weightings that we applied to each of these criteria to perhaps create a custom ranking for your own particular needs. But we break out the evaluation on a very detailed set of essentially functional criteria. On the right-hand side, you can see a fair amount of the criteria devoted to data coverage, right? So really drilling in to understand of the 5 key data types we've called out here, what's the breadth and depth of the data provided by a particular provider? How do they go about acquiring that data? How do they process it to ensure the highest quality data that they can provide to you? What provisions do they have in place and certifications have they received to ensure the security of your data and protect the privacy of the individuals and organizations from which the data is gathered? We cover use cases. How do the data providers meet the needs, or what complementary services do they provide for basics in terms of data management, data hygiene? How do they support sales? And how do they support marketing? And then also, how can they be integrated into your existing MarTech, sales tech stacks and workflows, which is increasingly important today. We'll talk a little bit about that. So that's roughly half the score. The other half is comprised of our assessment of how well does the company go to market, what is the efficacy of their solution packaging and pricing, and then our take on where are they headed in the future. Do we feel like they're really thinking about the right trends and that they should be following as they build out and continue to enhance their solutions? So as I said, you'll have a copy of this in a live version. So a couple of high-level observations. Some of this, I think, is very consistent with what Evan mentioned in his presentation. We certainly see the same thing, that these core data providers continue to expand. That was true in 2018. It continues to be true today. As a result, we're seeing many of these suppliers start to kind of look alike, right, in terms of the types of data that they provide, the actual data types that they provide. One of the newer entrants being behavioral intent data, but that's very quickly really reached table stakes for a lot of the reasons we talked about and what's driving the need for data, ABM certainly being a catalyst in the use of behavioral and intent data. And one of the facts of life with data providers is they tend to license data from each other. Some have proprietary data sources, certainly our sponsors do, but then it's also true, just generally speaking, of all the major core comprehensive data providers. They tend to license data from each other and share. It is absolutely true, and that's one of the reasons why we built out that set of criteria that we did, that they continue to add increasingly sophisticated levels of support for data management, marketing, and sales use cases. I mentioned data hygiene, sort of the ICP and TAM analysis for ABM from a sales perspective, even providing capabilities to do territory planning and enable improved sales prospecting. The one area where it feels like a lot of the vendors are trying to make progress is around geographic coverage, but feedback is still somewhat mixed. I think that's an area for improvement for a lot of the vendors. It's a tough problem to solve, and it's frankly getting tougher given the increasing reliance and focus on privacy concerns. So that is typically one of the areas when I talked about how people buy a core comprehensive solution and then add niche providers. It's often those niche providers are around local and regional data. One of the things that's also happening, and this is certainly true, we made this observation within the process of doing this wave evaluation, but I'll also bring that perspective from some of the other technology markets I cover and strategies like ABM, because what I'm seeing is really the notion of what it means to be a data provider is evolving. Evan touched on that. I mean, all of these solutions are not only these core comprehensive data providers, and not only offering kind of lightweight bolt-ons for basic data hygiene, deduping, cleansing, normalization, that sort of thing, or maybe a Chrome plugin for their sales to enable sales reps to see what data is available to them as they're out prospecting, looking at LinkedIn or maybe looking at a website. But they're actually building a portfolio of really best-of-breed applications meant to compete on their own in the marketplace that are all built on top of that core data asset. That's a really fundamental change in how these companies go to market and what the portfolio of solutions that they offer around and on top of their data assets look like. At the same time, we've made this observation, frankly, it was part of that first vendor landscape I did back in 2017. We saw early signs that some of the even application vendors were licensing data and making it available in their solutions. That trend has accelerated. It is true now, even more so now, there are a wider range of application vendors providing, essentially embedding data, sometimes that they license from third-party providers, from data providers, and embedding, or sometimes they've bought a data provider and they actually baked it into their solutions. The places within the MarTech stack where this seems to be most prevalent, this type of trend, is in the ABM platform space and in CDPs for reasons that should be pretty obvious, right? We talked about ABM platforms. ABM is a data-driven motion, so having data resident, really native and embedded in the platform, you can see the value. It certainly provides a great value to buyers and users of an ABM platform. Same thing is true of a customer data platform. I mean, at heart, it is about unifying data to create that sort of single source of truth, unified profile, whether it's contact, buying team, or account level. Many of the leading CDPs, or let's say some of the leading CDPs, not only actually bring third-party data as part, it's embedded, it's native, it's part of the solution. So then the challenge is, okay, let's pull in the customer's first-party data and create that unified platform. That's a benefit, but it's also a potential challenge for marketers as well. Having more options sometimes can make it more difficult to make a decision. So I want to finish with just 3 recommendations. And again, this is pretty close to the conversation I have every day with clients when they set up inquiries, user clients that would like to either get my feedback on a particular set of vendors or just thinking more broadly about who they should consider. In steering the conversation for them, and again, in a discussion of who their core data provider should be, it is about who does the most best, right? Who offers the widest, deepest, and highest quality data. That's directional, but clearly for individual companies, what I try to help them understand is, what are your business objectives, right? How do you go to market? Do you target large enterprises? Do you target SMB or SOHO? Are you a global organization? Will you be targeting US and North America, or potentially firms around the world? Is your motion primarily net new install base or both? All are factors in thinking about which vendor to choose, because they all have relative strengths and weaknesses. And that's the kind of thing that we evaluated them on. And if you have an opportunity to read through the wave, you'll get a sense of where some vendors, how this manifests in their solutions. It's also true that because of that everyone licenses to everyone phenomenon and dynamic within the market, there may be opportunities to actually consolidate suppliers. So nothing sort of, I'm not asking you to do anything nefarious. So I think it's a fair question to ask when you're talking to data providers. Ask where a certain data type may come from, right? Is it licensed? Where does it come from? It may, because you may be licensing that today. I've had that situation from a number of times from that individual provider. That may provide an opportunity for you to consolidate. And always test or pilot if you can, and make sure to request customer references that look like you do. That's the best way to get the best insights that can help you make the best decision. I touched briefly in the criteria about how integrations and APIs are really important, and this is really the end development of that trend that Evan mentioned, right, where none of these suppliers are list providers really today. It is a comprehensive suite. They have value-added services and applications, and a big part of what they're doing is working to expose that data directly within your existing stack and workflows, right? So those things like real-time alerts in the CRM for a seller to alert them when the data provider has picked up a new market signal that something may be happening at that particular rep's target accounts, right? Sales support is certainly one of, I think, the leading edges and where a lot of money and development is being devoted to, because it is so easy to prove ROI on those types of investments. And then in that effort to really make it as easy as possible to turn that raw data into insights, focus on those vendors with those key native integrations and APIs into your key systems. And then finally, we've talked an awful lot about how these comprehensive platforms, really, it's more than the data. It is all these complementary components, applications, or services. It's surprising how many times I have conversations with user clients, and they'll ask about, say, a new data type. They may say, I'm working with vendor X, but I'm thinking of adding a behavioral or intent data provider. And how often I have to remind them, or frankly let them know, that their existing data provider actually has that today. I think sometimes maybe it's at the user level, or sometimes some of these organizations perhaps could do a little better job of staying in touch with their existing providers to stay on top of what their plans are and what's been rolled out recently. That's true whether or not you're evaluating a new vendor to go deep on the product roadmap and vision, but also, as I said, with your existing vendors. And then finally, it's a dynamic market. Keep an eye out for new features and applications. As I said, there may be additional opportunities in the near term to really consolidate some of that MarTech stack proliferation that we've all been thinking about and dealing with and suffering under over the past 5 to 10 years, that explosion of MarTech solutions. I think we're now getting to a point where data is becoming more ubiquitous, ubiquitously available within the MarTech stack. There may be an opportunity for some consolidation in the near term. So I hope that was helpful and you found that useful. Happy to answer any questions when they come up, but for now I'll hand it back to Jim.
Thank you, Steve. Our next speaker is a 30-year veteran of the data and technology space. Liz Barrett currently leads Dun Bradstreet's Data Advisory Services organization, having previously served in the role of Distinguished Architect, Master Data, where she provided guidance and support to hundreds of Dun Bradstreet's clients of all business types and sizes, such as IBM, Microsoft, Dell, Google, Verizon, and Amazon. Prior to this, as a practitioner for 8 years, Liz led and participated in several global master data programs, often as a customer of Dun Bradstreet's. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, thank you so much. Just want to make sure you can see the slides coming up.
They're fine.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. I just had to refresh my screen. Thank you so much for your time today. I just wanted to reiterate a lot of what you heard now from Steve and Evan. Basically, what I'm hearing is turning data into power it's required today, but we also are seeing it's very hard. There's a lot to think about when you're considering your data provider. And we know at D&B we can help. So Dun Bradstreet, we've been in the data business now for 180 years. And what we've seen is that data providers support organizations differently. And both Evan and Steve spoke to this, right? It can start with a data broker, that list provider. They're providing you with transactional assistance, ad hoc requests you have. It meets your immediate need and usually supports a particular use case like sales prospecting via a file. Then there's a provider who is more on the niche capability where they tend to be a little bit less tactical with a short-term strategy to meet your needs there. And there's the need for analysis for maybe a planned event. So you're going to work with a niche provider who can help you get there. Your use case is typically that multi-touch campaign for an upcoming product launch or something similar. So, data brokers are starting very transactional, needs-based. Niche provider takes you to that next level, a little bit more short-term strategy. But really what it comes right down to is the core partner and the niche providers. They're going to give you that longer-term strategy. Usually there's a vision to having maybe one common view across the enterprise, similar to what Evan talked about with master data, being able to also incorporate niche providers to augment the insights of that core partner. And the use case usually is something along the line of cross-functional views. And what we find is that most companies, maybe they start with one, they change to another, they restart or reset depending on the provider. And this is typical of what we see out there. At Dun Bradstreet, though, we believe there's a significant difference between a data provider and a data partner. And we believe a data partner is going to join you on every step of your journey and help you not to have to start and stop with different providers along the way. So if we think about the journey, where you might start, a newer business, starting somewhat basic, that transactional with limited management, you've got varying degrees and definitions by silo. A lot of times it's an analyst using Excel and Access to maybe connect some of this data. They become your most important person at the business because they're spending a lot of time cleaning and standardizing and connecting your data. And what they get from a provider that's more of a partner is they become a sponge. They want to learn everything they possibly can, but it's that one person who's analyzing the data, and they become your specialist. Then when you move to opportunistic, data's typically handled in silos. The organizations aren't totally ready to make data and analytics a key focus. They know it's important, and usually it's because it lacks that executive leadership. The business wants benefits from great data and data management, but they have limited funding and resources. But when we look from a partner perspective, there's a lot of interest in best practices, but it's more because they're trying to avoid pitfalls and they want to learn from others. But a partner can really support and provide that kind of insight and capability. When we move up to organize, you've got more data strategy and business benefits beginning to align. There's some maybe governance policies initiated, maybe around creation of records. There might be a data champion on the executive team, someone who's benefited from great data before in a previous job and wants to bring it to the new business, and they really believe data is important. And you start incorporating some of those data best practices. Partners provide a lot of thought, leadership, and how-tos, and they actually give you access to experts to augment your resources. When you move up to connected, it's more like one central division is focused on data and analytics. They typically have maybe a CDO or a data champion in place. You're starting to get some ROI benefits. Data becomes a little bit more at the center of everything we do. They start thinking and talking around data more prospectively, and they really start to benefit from that data partner. The experts become much more engaged regularly. The partners providing more support, more analytical capability. And that leads to transformational, where typically you see a CDO sitting on the executive team. You've got data as an asset incorporated in all your decisions. The data partner is instrumental in the business's success. Experts now are part of the extended team. There's detailed analytics, and you now have the power to turn your data into that asset. So let me talk you through an example of one of our customers' data journeys that we've been involved in for several years. And it actually probably goes back before the early 2000s, but we're going to start there, where this customer, they were in a data discovery mode. They needed best performance for their sales and marketing campaign. They began their journey, this particular team with Dun Bradstreet, for specifically around telemarketing use cases through a manual file process. As we continued to work with them, by the mid-2000s, this customer started going through a business transformation and undergoing several mergers and acquisitions, changed their name several times, and data automation became a need. And it was the focus was, based on aggregating the accounts using the DUNS number. So for the customer, D&B became instrumental in their foundational capabilities with the DUNS number as a core. By 2010, the customer starts shifting their business model as the market moved towards a more technology-first approach. So when we started to look at their silos, it was based on the technology changes that were going on. And this customer decided they needed to create one source of record, for each business unit, having D&B again as data foundation across these various systems. And they were able to do that because they used the DUNS number as that virtual connector going across their entire business, their enterprise. And where are we at today? Well, the customer is undergoing a digital transformation, and they're aligning existing data ecosystems with modernized delivery methods. Extremely digital business. And using the, more than 4 different D&B products and services, we're now embedded in their ecosystem to solve for sales, marketing, finance, master data use cases, and they're implementing modern APIs to feed D&B data across the enterprise. And this is just one example of how D&B partnered with this company early on in their data transformation, just like we talked about in the previous slide. And we continue to grow and help evolve with that customer to the point where we are at the table working with this customer to ensure that, data has become a powerful asset for them. So just, 3 key things to consider. Time is key. A well-structured data program is going to take time, right? A partner can help you find the right balance, providing tried and true methodologies, get you off the ground running, and help you realize your investment sooner. Remember that expertise is your friend, a proven partner who has expertise and successes in helping organizations through pitfalls, allowing you to focus on your priorities, leaving the hard work to a dedicated team of experts. We're there to support you. And just remember, not all data providers are created equal. Every organization has varying needs and goals. Some of our most successful customers started out small, became bigger, but we all adapted together. You want a partner that can grow with you. You want a partner to ensure you have the power to grow and succeed. So what can we do to help you? Let's get started with a complimentary analysis. You'll be able to click on this link, and we're going to provide you with access to our D&B Data Cloud. We want to give you things like how much has your data changed over time. We want to help you understand your duplicates. Where is your revenue coming from today? Where the opportunity for you to grow globally or stay right within the United States, within your own community. Really depends on what your particular needs are. We have the opportunity to show you the world, whatever view that is for you. So if we can work with you on that, you'll have access to our experts, right? These experts actually work for me as part of my team in the data advisory area. We have 28 different data experts, from data advisors to strategists to principal consultants. We've helped hundreds of customers improve their match and data processes. And we want to be there for you at every level of your maturity as you're going through the data process. So look to D&B. We're here to support you. We want to help you. We want to give you the power to drive your data to ensure that you have the business success that you need to grow. Thank you so much. Jen?
Thank you, Liz. Let's move into our Q&A period now, and my first question is for Evan. With so many data provider choices, how do I know which one to use?
Well, I think we've all actually responded with a different take or slice to that particular question. And I think it's really about understanding what is the type of need an activity that you need support with? I mean, as all of the speakers have discussed, is it purely data augmentation, firmographing, those types of details? Do you actually need a partner to come work with you to support the analytics and marketing process? Do you need platform and other types of technical expertise? And obviously all the various and sundry things to fill in. So step one is really, what is it that you need? And also think about, where do you expect to be in a year or two? Because you just don't want to deal with a point in time. You want to understand the direction that you're going. And I think that will make it very clear on which partners to consider.
All right, thanks. Steve, our next question is for you. Who has the best intent data?
Sorry, is on mute? Boy, we could spend a couple of hours on that particular topic. I talked about it in my section, and I guess the shortest form I could possibly put that in is you may actually have in your own first-party data the best intent data that you can gather. There are certainly third-party intent data is valuable. But it's worth really thinking about all the behavioral signals that you can gather about what your prospects and customers are doing to make an observation and draw some sort of inference from that observation of their behavior, which is essentially what you're saying when you're applying or ascribing intent as a term to describe someone's behavior. It's a long conversation, but I guess my best answer would be think of third-party data is valuable, but really you may find that ultimately the best picture of intent you will get comes from the data you gather on a first-party basis from real close contact and observation.
Okay, thanks. Liz, our next question is for you. How long does implementation take for Dun and Bradstreet data?
Great question, Jim. I guess think about it from this perspective. There are several ways to access D&B data and products and services. We have a lot of turnkey options. It really just depends on how fast you want to maybe ingest, digest, and empower your data processes and systems. We meet you at your speed. So if you need something turnkey, we can set that up and get you up and running within the first day. If you'd like something a bit more custom, we have the ability to support you in that area as well.
Evan, here's somebody seeking some advice. We handle all our outbound marketing communications, and most of that is responding to inbound requests. We already have their information. So why do I need to think about a data provider?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've dealt with a number of clients about that. The real thing to consider, particularly in the world of analytics and being focused in who you want to contact, is what is it that you don't know? And one of the powers of this data provider universe is identifying not only additional information about the people that are contacting you, but also the people that you don't know, because all too often you don't see a complete picture of the individual that's contacting you and the company behind the curtain and how large it is and the various and other details. And that's where I think all the various data content and the services that a data provider can offer really makes a huge difference.
Stephen, how important are data security and privacy when choosing a data provider?
I think it really depends on the state of your business, right? Certainly when you're taking advantage of the services offered by a data provider and it involves them touching your first-party data, potentially storing it outside your firewall, security is of paramount importance, right? But when you're focused on that augmentation and enrichment piece, then really the focus shifts to privacy. The one observation I'd make about privacy is there, and probably no surprise to most people on the call today, there's a distinct difference in terms of how that's viewed and what the strictures are and requirements are on a global basis. I'm something of a skeptic regarding in sort of North American markets. I think we take a much more hands-off approach, or privacy is important, but not quite as important as it is in other regions. Let's put it that way.
Liz, our final question is for you. If you're in a lower level of data maturity, what do you recommend an organization do first?
Well, first of all, just remember, we've all been there, right? So the matter of fact is just really understand what you're trying to do with your data, where you want to go with it, and then think about picking a partner who's going to grow with you. I've worked with myself hundreds of customers. I have been a master data practitioner, so I have been at all different levels, and I've worked with customers of all different levels. Start engaging with a data partner right out of the gate from the get-go. Don't think about having to go the road yourself. It's really hard for you to mature and continue the process without having some kind of expert or resources to help guide you and hold your hand. Work with us. dnb.com, we can help get you on the road and start giving you some information, whether it's even white papers or blogs or videocasts. We have a lot of insight, and we want to get you the right people to talk to. So start thinking about where you want to go. Let us be part of your journey.
Well, we're out of time here, so let me take a moment to thank our speakers today. We heard from Evan Levy with Integral Data, Stephen Casey with Forrester, and Liz Barrett with Dun Bradstreet. Also, again, thanks to Dun Bradstreet for sponsoring today's webinar. Remember that we recorded today's webinar, and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues. And don't forget, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the click here for a PDF line. Finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, webinars, and information on business intelligence, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. And with that, from all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.